Hello. I'm using the opportunity because today is a sunny day and next whole week, I think by Friday, we're gonna have rain every day, and I'm pretty sure it's gonna be very dark in my room, so I'm using this opportunity to kind of record this vlog, not a vlog, but a video. I have this idea for some time that I wanted to share some books that I read a long time ago. Some of them I've read in my 20s, and some of them I've read in my 30s. And they are still books that I recommend. I haven't, however, reread them myself since the first time. So maybe for me now they would have aged differently. For sure they would. It would be a completely different experience because in the meantime I have read many more books and educated myself more on these topics. But at the time when I was reading them, they made a strong impression on me, and I still do recommend them, especially if you are someone who's trying to get familiar with certain topics. And also because some of these authors are also my favorite authors in the genre that they write in. And yeah, I think a lot of these books have shaped me as a reader, and they also have opened up new dimensions, new doors for understanding certain topics and delving in deeper after reading some of these books. So the first book in question is called A Quiet Revolution. Oh yeah, before I begin, I want to mention another thing, is that I will not be reading the short summary of the content for each book, but I would rather reflect on what I remember from reading them, specifically because I think it would just not be as beneficial as my own reflection. And keep in mind that this reflection that I have now, that I will share with you, excuse me. So keep in mind that the reflection that I will share with you now is actually a reflection solely based on the recollection of certain aspects of these books that I read, meaning that it's been many years since I read some of these books, so I don't remember in great detail most of the things that are in the book, and whether I would be more critical to them now, I also am unable to answer because I haven't reread them. And yeah, so just keep that in mind while I go through this short stack of books. So the first book is called A Quiet Revolution, The Veil's Resurgence from the Middle East to America by Leilda Ahmed. This is a book that I used actually for my BA thesis, and it helped me really understand the history of whaling, specifically in Egypt. She focuses on Egypt more precisely, but it really... Excuse me. I apologize for that. I have been a little bit sick, so if I have a very red nose and if I sound like I have a scratch machine in my throat, that's why, like a broken voice machine, that's why I sound like it. So basically I read it because I was looking for a little bit deeper dive into the history of whaling and understanding of the history of whaling in the West. And this book really opened a fresh perspective for me at the time. I am not sure how I would see that book now, but it definitely helped me understand how I should analyze the topic for my BA dissertation. That was something that really shaped me and kind of pushed me in a direction where I ended up exploring more of this topic by different authors, mostly reading a lot of academic work connected to this subject. And yeah, if you're someone who's interested in this topic, maybe this book would be a good point to start, even though you might have a more critical perspective on it. If you come from a Muslim background or you are religious and you practice Islam, and maybe this book would not be as inclusive of different perspectives, but it does cover extensively the history of whaling from the religious perspective and non-religious perspective. Second book I'm going to recommend is actually my favorite monography, and it's the book that kind of opened up this door for me to read more monographies, and I really, really enjoyed it. And it's a rather long historical period that it covers. So the book in question is called Baghdad, City of Peace, City of Blood by Justin Marozzi. I actually purchased this book when I was traveling in Netherlands. I was in Amsterdam, and I found it by accident in one of the bookstores that I was visiting. They had a shelf of discounted books, and this was actually a book that was that's a hardcover, and it was heavily discounted. And on top of that, I got a student discount at the time, so you can imagine the joy. I think I paid for it like 10 euros, and the original price was like 30. So I was very happy after that purchase. So this book is covering the history of Baghdad, I believe from like 9th or 10th century, if I remember correctly. But Justin Marozzi is a brilliant author. He's actually a journalist who lived in Iraq for a long time. He did extensive research for this book, and he covered it with like a lot of, you can sense that he's really passionate about the culture, Iraqi culture, the history of the region, and the history of the city itself, and how rich and multicultural it always was, and how important Baghdad, what role the city itself played in the overall history, especially the Abbasid period in the Islamic history. I highly recommend it if you're unfamiliar with Iraq or the city itself, Baghdad. This would be like a great place for you to start, because it is written in a very clear language, approachable language. It's not heavily academic. It's not overly dry. That there isn't this like dry historical aspect to it, which I appreciate, because I'm also not a person who likes those kinds of books where you kind of dive straight in with a lot of names, a lot of dates, and it's very difficult to keep track of the development of the story, the historical development. So I think this would be a really, really good book for anyone who is interested to get to know the history of Baghdad. Third book is Philosophers Without Gods, Meditations on Atheism and the Secular Life, edited by Louise M. Antony. I can tell you one thing. There was a period in my 20s when I was really, really interested in reading different religious texts and different books on the interpretation of religious texts. I was particularly interested in Gnostic Gospels, and I had like a whole phase where I was just reading Gnostic Gospels. And then I was interested in the perspective of people who were raised religiously but became atheists. And this book is actually just that. It has many philosophers, many academics from different fields talking about their atheism. And they come from different religious backgrounds. So it's very interesting to see how they cover this topic themselves, and what was their focus, how they approached the subject of atheism. And it's interesting also to see their journey finally coming to the point where they would for themselves claim the identity of being an atheist. The fourth book is actually a more recent read in comparison to the previous three. I've read this, I think, when the pandemic started. It's called Extraordinary Insects, Weird, Wonderful, Indispensable, The Ones Who Run Our World, by Sverdrup-Thygeson. She is a biologist, I think. I'm not sure. Maybe she's like specialized in particular part or field within biology. I cannot remember now. But I can tell you that this book really opened up a world of insects for me, especially as a young adult and as a child. I was quite scared of a lot of insects, and this book kind of gave me a new perspective on insects and how they actually are incredibly important. I mean, my perspective on insects has changed over the years. Of course, it changed even before I was reading this book. However, I think this book really opened up particular aspects of their importance in ecosystems. I'm quite fascinated with the details that she shared in the book about certain insects. And I can say that since reading it, I have a lot more compassion for the insects, even the ones that I'm scared of. But it was fascinating and eye-opening to read it. And I know that there are other books that also cover similar topics and similar beings that we kind of have myths around, in the sense that they are turned into these like monsters who are trying to destroy us. For example, a praying mantis comes to mind. Like if you watch any of the old horror films, I think like from the 50s, like the aliens always kind of look like praying mantis. So I think it's very good to read these kind of books in order to kind of break these taboos that we grew up with regarding particular beings that also inhabit this planet and are incredibly important for the ecological perspective. Like they really do run the world. Like without insects, we will not be alive. Next one is also a more recent read. I read it also during the first wave of the pandemic in 2020. That is a collection of poetry by Wislawa Szymborska, View with a Grain of Sand. Do I remember any of the poems from this collection? I do not, but I just remember the feeling that it gave me, and I just remember the deep moments of contemplation that I had while I was reading it. So if you are not familiar with her poetry and you would like to familiarize yourself, I recommend this collection. It's quite diverse. It has a diverse selection of her poetry. Next book is a little bit older read. I actually purchased this book when I was in Vienna in 2016. for retaking some of my last exams that I had before I finished my BA. And I actually bought this book in Shakespeare and Co. in Vienna, the same bookstore that I visited on my last trip, and I shared it in the vlog. It's called Wittgenstein's Vienna, A Life and Culture of Habsburg Vienna Before World War I. The city of Freud, Schoenberg, Klimt, and Wittgenstein, whose philosophy announced the birth of the modern era. So it's basically talking about Vienna from this period, and it dives deep into the daily life of the Viennese people, mostly, of course, the art scene and the literary scene. So you will get this very particular view of Vienna. And of course, he talks about Ludwig Wittgenstein, the philosopher. And I cannot remember now whether he lived at the time in Vienna. It could be, and whether like it's very focused on his perspective of the city. I don't really remember, but it was a really good book. I enjoyed it, and it's again like monography of the city, and it's a history of one of the most important cultural hubs of the early 20th century in Europe. Vienna was basically a place where everyone would go for either education, from this region at least. I do apologize for like coughing and having to sip water occasionally, but my throat gets really dry and irritated, and then I have to cough, unfortunately. It seems like I will have to take a break. We shall see how it goes. Okay, I had to take like a break. You can probably see that I'm red in the face because I just had the most horrible cough. I had to take like a candy for the throat. I had the most horrible cough when I was now in a coffee shop. It was so embarrassing. And I'm really trying not to be around people. I had one when I was walking down the street, and it's just non-stop, and I cannot stop coughing. But hopefully it will go away soon, because this is really annoying. As you can see, I'm really annoyed, and whenever I get sick, oh, this is horrible. Whenever I get sick, as I was saying, whenever I get sick, it always goes to my sinuses, because I have problem with allergies that don't really manifest themselves with sneezing, but rather my inside part of the nose gets swollen, and I get like tinnitus in my ears, and I don't want to go into great detail, but anyway, this is how it manifests itself. If I get sick, if I get a bacterial infection in my sinuses, then I just cough a lot. So, where was I? Yes, the next book is called The Architecture of Happiness by Alain de Botton. So this book I read it when I was, I think, maybe 24, 25. I loved Alain de Botton's writing. I loved his lectures, his also YouTube channel. And I enjoyed quite a lot of these like cartoon presentations of different authors, philosophies. They're quite a nice introduction if you are a young adult and you're looking to find some information about different topics. They cover all kinds of stuff. And this book in particular is dealing with the architecture and how the architecture can affect our life in a good or bad way, mentally, in the sense how it can affect our life, how practical the city is, and how practical, not in the sense of commuting, that is also equally important, but in the sense whether the city offers space where you can go and enjoy not just the architecture, but just the way the city itself has been planned out, the urban environment, that is. I don't remember any of the particularities about the book. I just remember that after reading it, I was paying more close attention to the way the buildings are constructed, the designs, and I've particularly noticed a difference when I moved to China and when I lived there, how I didn't enjoy the big cities in China, more specifically because of this modern, postmodernist approach to architecture, where you have these really kind of tall glass buildings that don't really offer any like creativity. I would not say, they just look very much the same. And there's very little green spaces like public parks and in general areas where you can take a break from the urban life, and most importantly take a break from noise pollution, which is something that I find quite unbearable. And especially in last 10 years I've been to cities that are heavily polluted with noise from motorways, and that's something that I really dislike, and it greatly affects my own perception of the city if there's a lot of noise pollution. Next one is Orhan Pamuk's Istanbul Memories and the City. Again, this is sort of a mix between a monography and an autobiography, because Orhan Pamuk writes the history of Istanbul from the perspective of his own life, that is his family's history in the city, and how the city has changed over the decades since he was a child. So we see like perspective of the city from his individual perspective, how the city has changed and how he has changed as an individual and grown, and how city also has changed and grown, not necessarily in the same direction, but we also see how this change has affected his family. And I don't know if this was the first book from Orhan Pamuk that I read, but it's definitely one of my favorite. And if you are not familiar with his work, you can start with this monography / autobiography, because it's a fast read. The style of writing is very beautiful. He has a particular way of telling stories, and I really enjoyed it. I actually bought it also for my mom for her birthday at one point, just in Serbian translation. I read it in English. Next one is Fernando Pesoa, A Century Pesoa, which has been edited by Eugenio Lisboa and L.C. Taylor with an introduction by Octavio Paz. I actually found this book by pure accident in the library in Iceland. It's national/university library, and they have open space where you can choose the books that you want, but they also have area that you cannot access and you have to order online. I was reading Pessoa in my early 20s. I think I was 20 or 21 when I was reading him, when I read some of his first translations that I found in Serbian. It was in this collection of poetry called Poezia. And I bought several of their publications that included his poetry. And I started slowly researching his work. And then eventually, just by accident, when I was browsing through the shelves in this library, I found this book. I ended up purchasing it online when I lived in China and then brought it back to Serbia. So I think the book has traveled a fair amount of kilometers around the world. And I really recommend it because it's a very interesting collection of Pessoa's work. It includes his diaries, it includes his pieces on astrology. He was like obsessed with astrology. It includes his poetry. It includes diaries from perspective of his different heteronyms that he created. So it's really a diverse collection of his work. Although maybe I haven't read his Book of Disquiet, which I showed in one of the previous videos that I purchased. So maybe that would be a first book that is a better introduction to his work. But I found this one to be equally good, and especially because it's not a book that you read from cover to cover. You can go back and forth between certain parts of the book, even though most of the book, I think if not all of the book, is sort of has this diary aspect to it where you have like different periods of Pessoa's life, and there is a short introduction to this period, what was going on around Europe and what was he doing at the time, and then kind of introducing his diary entries and poetry and other writing. Next one is called 1930, Summer of the Century by Florian Elas. I read this actually in Serbian translation, but there is an English translation. And this is a book that is covering the year 1913, just before the First World War. It is sort of like a diary book about different individuals who lived at the time, who were important for the art scene and literary scene in Europe, and their whereabouts at the time in Europe. So their whereabouts in the sense, what were they doing just before the First World War started? It's a really fast read. I think it's also a very interesting aspect, a very interesting way to explore a history, a micro history of a particular year that would eventually lead to a First World War. Next book is Zealot by Reza Aslan, The Life and Times of Jesus of Nazareth. Just recently, I exchanged some comments with one person on Instagram. They were actually posting this book in a pile of books that they've read or were planning to reread, something like that. I love this book. I love Reza Aslan's work. He is an academic who, in religious studies, he has written different books, particularly books that are connected to Islam. But this book is actually about the historical Jesus. And he takes you to the time of Jesus in Jerusalem. And he really represents the mundane of the microcosm, the micro life of ordinary people in Jerusalem at the time and in historic Palestine in general. So he makes a distinction between the historic Jesus and the divine Jesus, the one that we know through Christianity. And I really loved this book. It was brilliant. And if you're looking for a book to introduce you more to the study of religion and just in general history of religion, I think you should check not just this book but any of the books that Reza Aslan has written. Next one is Blood Dark by Louis. Okay, I'm gonna attempt and pronounce this last name, but whoever is French around here, please correct me. Louis Guillot. Oh, I should have Googled this. Hold on, let me see this. Oh, Guillot. Guillot. That was not even close to how I pronounced it. So this is also a more recent read. I read it also during the pandemic. I bought it when I was in China, and the reason why I bought it is because it's sold as the favorite novel of Albert Camus. And I loved it. It's about this philosophy professor who is resisting the First World War and the craze for war during that period, and how he is slowly ostracized in this small town where he lives in France. It's a brilliant book, although it does have a lot of misogyny and sexism in it, but I think it's rather representative of the times. But I really enjoyed it. I think this author is a really good writer. I have not read anything else from him. I'm not even sure whether it's available in the translation, English translation or Serbian translation. But this was my first introduction to him, and I highly recommend it. Next one is Loaded, Disarming History of the Second Amendment by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, I believe she's a historian or maybe a sociologist. I'm not really sure. She is an academic, that is for sure, and she has written books on the history of indigenous history of Americas. More particularly North America. I think it's just indigenous history of North America. This one is talking about why Americans are obsessed with guns. And I loved it. It's a very short book. It's a tiny book. I think it's about maybe 150 pages. It's also a very small format, so you will read it very fast. When I read it, I was like, I need me some more of Roxanne. So if you're interested to understand the socio-political context of gun ownership and the history of it in US, this is a book for you. Finally, the last one is actually a book published in Serbian. I don't think it's available in English. I'm pretty sure it's not. It's called Bordell of Muses. I'm translating now to English. Anthology of French erotic poetry, which was selected and prepared by Danilo Kish. I think I read this when I was about maybe 21. A friend had gifted this copy to me, and I really enjoyed it. And there was a lot of like erotic poetry that was just so funny. It was mocking this kind of conservatism around eroticism in French culture in, I think, like 17th century. I think the earliest poetry that was selected here is either 16th or 17th century, and a lot of these poems were written by poets I've never heard of. I cannot remember which poets they were selected, but I remember really enjoying it, and I was laughing a lot while reading it. I think it was also mocking this kind of Catholic upbringing that the French people have regarding shame connected to sex, and in general anything that is connected to erotic aspect of our lives. I recommend this for people who can read in Serbian or Croatian or any of the BHS variations in the region. It's available in Latin alphabet, which is very important, because if it was available in Cyrillic, then it would be just limited to Serbia and Montenegro. I think most of the ex-Yugoslavs who don't come from Serbia or Montenegro, once they see the Cyrillic, they just get extreme anxiety, which I understand. So yeah, so that's it. That's a list. It's again a little bit longer video than I expected. Hopefully I will be able to trim it down, all these coughing moments that you had to go through with me. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.